Ministry of Fate Management announcement. Average life expectancy has increased by 10 days. There better be Wi-Fi in that coffin, Maria. Check it a few more times before they bury me. Mark repeated the line once again to his wife, who sat across from him in a sleek armchair. She smiled with practiced ease and gave her standard reply, "Yes, darling." He leaned over her shoulder and saw the screen of her phone. In the search bar, widow benefits, government payouts. Mark muttered a curse and reminded her, "What did I ask you to check?" Maria blinked at him with long, synthetic lashes. Her gaze was blank, apathetic. Of course, he sighed. Why do you even need Wi-Fi in there? Her mother chimed in, never lifting her eyes from the tablet, having already buried several husbands. She was now browsing a dating app, swiping through profiles of younger men. Amelia, times have changed. Even the Postmortem Gazette is digital only. Now, as if the latest headlines will matter to you in that box, she muttered, liking a 30-year-old masseur with mechanical precision. Mark glared at her. From under his brow, "I want to see my daughter grow up." He hadn't expected those words, but they rose up first and turned out to be the only ones that mattered. All you want is to ruin. Mattia's chance at finally finding happiness after you're gone, Amelia snapped, giving him a look that was half scorn, half pity. He nearly shouted at her. "Me? You're the one who I was comfortable with him," Maria interrupted, speaking more to herself than to her mother. She shifted in her seat and adjusted her warm sweater. His anger vanished like smoke. Pressing his lips together, he swallowed the insult and gave his wife a grateful glance. Amelia simply snorted and rolled her eyes with theatrical flair. Why she despised him so deeply, Mark had never understood. He pulled a folded sheet of paper from his inside pocket, his to-do list. After a moment's thought, he added one more line. Submit Form GC43 to the Ministry of Fate. Confirm Wi-Fi stability. Reminder from the Ministry of Fate Management. According to the regulation on final existential status, return from postmortem condition is not subject to approval the next day. Mark stood in the dim hall of Johnson's sons, grandsons, and great-grandsons. Funeral bureau. Tall windows were draped in thick black velvet, making the air feel dense and motionless. At the center of the room loomed a massive coffin, a wooden cube, about 2.5 meters per side. Mark ran his hand along the lacquered surface. It was warm. It's almost alive. Many years ago, as a teenager, he had once stumbled into the abandoned Imperial Library. Among the mahogany shelves bathed in amber sunset light, he'd felt inexplicably at home. He'd climbed the narrow staircase, with its polished banister, to the upper tier, where dreaming came easier for some reason. Every detail there felt like a work of art. Carved ornaments, rounded corners, tiny statues of antique muses crafted with invisible care. He could sit there for hours, not reading, not thinking, just existing. His coffin was made in that spirit inside. It was somewhere between a personal study and a miniature library. In the center lay a cushioned bed, upholstered in ivory silk. Hidden within the walls were compartments, one with a laptop, one with a change of clothes, and another containing a few personal treasures, a dog-eared copy of Robinson Crusoe, a family photo in a wooden frame, and a plastic diamond ring he'd once stolen as a boy from a toy store. That ring remained his only deliberate act of rebellion. A tiny, childish defiance against fate. "Everything to your liking?" came a soft voice. An elderly man stood before him, dressed in a perfectly pressed black tailcoat and top hat. His face was the very image of polite professionalism. "I read that you used to be able to choose your own death date. Is that true? Or just an old myth?" Mark asked thoughtfully. "Savage times," the undertaker replied with a faint smile. Mark nodded, then hesitated. "Would it be possible to, say, add a backup exit to the coffin?" "An exit," the man echoed. "You never know. Just a little hatch and maybe a shovel." "Everyone wants something," he shrugged. "Some ask for an exit, some for a shovel, others for a second envelope. But in the end, they all end up here? So that's a no?" The undertaker shook his head slowly. "Pity." Mark thought about continuing, but the man had already disappeared behind the velvet curtain, vanishing into the gloom. Once, they buried him. All living needs, food, water, bathing, even using the toilet would be irrelevant. Tiny nanobots inside his body would keep him in a suspended state. His organs would sleep. Only his muscles would retain function, and his mind. With a heavy sigh, Mark took an envelope from his pocket. Unsealing it, he read the cursive print unchanged after all these years. Death, July 12, 20-35. Life will be sole heir to a wealthy family. Will marry once. Will have one daughter. Every person on the planet received such an envelope at birth, a promise of absolute predictability. No surprises, no second chances, everything accounted for, even death. For a brief moment, Mark wanted to tear the document apart, just shred it into crumpled scraps and scatter them across the floor. But common sense stopped the cowardly impulse. He carefully tucked the message back into his inner pocket. Announcement from the Ministry of Fate Management, in accordance with the concept of progressive human civilization. The phenomenon of death is considered a necessary element of evolutionary processes. Nevertheless, on humanitarian grounds, a governmental decree dated August 1st, 2100, mandated the temporary suspension of its physically perceptible manifestations. Only minutes remained before the burial. Mark lay quietly in the coffin, eyes closed. Outside, along one wall, stood a wooden platform looming over his still living body. There on simple stools sat his family, observing the ceremony with polite solemnity. His daughter Sonia sat in the front row, absorbed in her phone. A shame, he thought, that he wouldn't get to see her grow up, only perhaps in the occasional photo online. Technicians had come by twice to ask if he was lying comfortably. Once, a psychologist had stopped and gently offered, "Would you like some calming music? They say it helps." "No, thank you," Mark had replied. Now the priest had begun reading the prayer for the departed Amelia. As tradition demanded, wept into the shoulder of a young man barely 30. Maria nervously twisted a handkerchief in her lap. Cousin Leonid had flown in from Africa. Mark had met him only once in his life. He was tall, shaggy, and impressively muscular. Rumor had it that he'd once fought a lion, and won because that's what his envelope had said. When the priest fell silent, Leonid stood, the last adult man in the family, and began his farewell speech. "Well, we all expected he'd die today, and here we are," he announced cheerfully. "Can't say anything bad about the guy. Solid man. Married a decent woman. Life turned out, well, normal. May the earth be a warm bed for him, forever and ever." "Thanks, Leon," Mark called up from inside the coffin, with a hint of irony. "No problem. Some battles just can't." "Be one. Enjoy the afterlife," Leonid added amicably, then sat down. "Who will take care of us now?" the mother-in-law wailed, as custom demanded. "Your wife, your daughter, will be lost without you." "Oh, they will. Goodbye, darling. When I find a new husband, I'll be sure to send you a picture," Maria sniffled. "Later, Dad, don't forget to check my posts on Telegram," Sonia added, without looking up from her screen. Then, unexpectedly, she sighed deeply. "I'm sorry," Amelia whispered, leaning closer. "I never meant to be cruel. I just didn't want Mattia's life to turn out like mine. Didn't want her to become a widow so soon." "I understand," Mark whispered. Then louder, so all could hear, he said, "Thank you all for a wonderful life," and waved goodbye. Before the lid was sealed, the carpenter, rough hands calloused and strong, asked carefully, "Ready?" "The procedure takes 2 minutes." Mark wanted to stop him, but the words caught in his throat. "Can we wait just a little? Just 2 hours? I just want to breathe one last time." He longed to say, "I'm ready," he said instead. The lid was nailed shut. Darkness fell. Outside, the hoist truck pulled up. A cable hooked the coffin and began lowering it gently into the grave. Mark was jostled several times, like on an old train departing for unknown lands. Then his new home touched down. The earth began to fall. The sounds grew fainter and fainter. Thud-thud notice. from the Ministry of Fate Management. Effective July 16th. Amendments to the legal framework governing fate correction will come into force. These changes establish the organizational and legal foundation for a new structural body, the Committee of Mood Regulation. A soft, ambient light flickered on. Mark couldn't find a comfortable position. He twisted and turned restlessly, invaded by strange thoughts. Who had he really been in life? Just a rich layabout spending his father's fortune? He'd built nothing of true value, except maybe the elegant interior of his coffin. And now, he was alone with that luxury. He tried again to lie still and fall asleep. But post-life didn't work like it used to. Sleep wouldn't come. Not like before. Maybe, he thought, this is what ghosts used to feel like, before death was controlled, and people still truly died. They wandered, tormented by boredom. Tormented, he thought suddenly. What a perfect word for what I feel. Right now, Mark turned sharply onto his side and spread out his arms. Everything felt tight, heavy. Should have made it bigger, he muttered. Why had he insisted on leaving something for the family? Why had he become so accommodating in those final days? By the way, ... how are they doing? He said aloud, sat up and opened the laptop. He visited his daughter's page, the first image in the feed. Flashed up, Sonia and her friends dressed. In black, grinning, making faces. Across the top, a glowing caption read, "Party for Daddy's funeral." Something tore inside him. He felt sick. He didn't read the comments. Mark reached for the laptop lid, ready to shut it closed, when a soft ding stopped him. A new message. He wasn't sure he wanted to know what it was. But what if? He clicked the pop-up. A voice message began to play from his daughter. "Hey Dad, I know you're watching me from ... wherever you are. I didn't know how to say this. I miss you, I guess. But we teens were like, not supposed to. You know, not supposed to be sad." She let out a small, sad laugh. "They'll probably ban that soon, too. Anyway, ... I'm sorry I love you. Mom does too. Even Grandma, even if she pretends not to. I'm sorry. Unfortunately, tears don't come after death." Mark wanted to reply, but then a loud warning chime rang from above, and a bright red hologram filled the wall. Communication with the outside world is prohibited. The light flickered red. The coffin seemed to shrink around him, squeezing the air from his lungs. He began to gasp, chest heaving and short. Sharp breaths. And then he remembered breathing wasn't required anymore, so he stopped. Silence. A strange rustling echoed above. It was faint at first, like footsteps on the grave. But it grew louder, more distinct with each passing minute. Mark thought he was hallucinating. The psychologist had warned him about that. An hour passed. Then, unmistakably, someone knocked. "Yes," he called hesitantly. The lid burst open with a violent crash. Daylight split apart the calm twilight of the afterlife. And Mark winced. Someone was violating his carefully arranged eternal rest. Standing above him was a young man in a black suit, tie knotted tight, face impassive. "Mark Ogorov?" he asked in an official tone. "Yes, Ministry of Fate Management, District North B8. The man introduced himself, and without pause added, "There's been a catastrophic error. You were given the wrong message in childhood. Here is the correct one." "An error?" Mark echoed, his voice tinged with hope. For the first time, things felt like they might actually make sense. The man handed him a new envelope. Thick. Sealed. Crisp. Mark sat up and accepted it with both hands. He tore it open carefully. His lips moved. His eyes darted from line to line. "Out loud, please," the official said with emphasis. Mark swallowed and read in a trembling voice, "Death, July 11th, 2235. Life, addict and criminal. Burial, government. Funded." Lifted his eyes and stared blankly at the man. "What? What does this even mean? Your coffin will be replaced by a standard issue plastic model, 50 cubic centimeters, provided free of charge." And then what? Mark asked. We'll transport you for reburial, according to your actual destiny. Mark shuddered. At first he didn't believe it, but then, unbidden, an image formed in his mind, horrific and clear. He's curled up in a fetal position, shoved inside a transparent plastic capsule, and for all eternity. He stares at his own groin. The official, meanwhile, handed him a form and a blue pen. Sign here, please, confirming you have. No objections to this. Administrative misunderstanding. It's standard procedure. He added reassuringly. Mark took the pen automatically, glanced at the sheet, and froze. Something inside him stirred. What if? I do object. You're entitled to submit a written complaint. Your local municipal representative will review it and issue a verdict promptly. He paused for a beat and lowered his voice. Though I'll tell you, decisions always favor the state. Mark looked down at the paper, then at the pen. He remembered. Mosh. Even his mother-in-law. And suddenly, to his own surprise, he felt that same reckless fire he'd known as a child. The one he'd felt just before stealing a plastic toy ring from the shop window. He wasn't stealing a thing back then. He was stealing the right to choose, to defy the path already laid out for him. He'd been afraid then, too. But right in front of him, like a divine sign, lay the same kind of toy. And Mark made his choice. With one sharp stroke, he crossed out the death date. Excuse me, what are you doing? The official asked, confused. Nothing, Mark snapped. Voice almost angry. Then, swiftly, he crossed out the second line. Stop. The official lunged to grab the pen. Mark leaned back into the coffin and yanked it away, in the blank space. He wrote carefully with steady hand. Life, keeper of the Imperial Library. Duration, indefinite. He looked upward and, for the first time in a long while, smiled. That's not allowed? The man in the suit shrieked. Oh, Mark said slyly. Are you absolutely sure about that? A warning chime rang out. Mark's gaze dropped. On the wall, glowing letters flashed, correction mode enabled, fate reset in progress. The man's knees buckled. He collapsed onto the grass. If anyone finds out about this,